Reminiscences of a Stock Operator by Edwin Lefevre. Picture this: no smartphones, no internet, no pulling up stock charts with a quick swipe. We're talking about a smoke-filled room in the late 1800s. There's this massive chalkboard taking up an entire wall, and a 14-year-old kid is frantically scribbling numbers as they're shouted out from a chattering, clicking machine in the corner, the stock ticker. But here's the thing. This boy isn't just writing down random figures. He's picking up on something nobody else seems to notice. While everyone else hears nothing but noise from that ticker, he's hearing a story unfold right before his eyes. He starts to realize that just before a stock makes a dramatic move, up or down, it does something specific. It's almost like it's dropping hints about what's coming next, so he grabs a little notebook and starts jotting down his predictions. He's not playing with fake money or anything. He just wants to see if he's actually onto something. And guess what? He's right way more often than he's wrong. One day, another office boy approaches him with a guaranteed stock tip. But our young friend doesn't care about hot tips. He flips through his notebook, checks his own observations, and sees the pattern is there. He scrapes together his savings with his buddy, a grand total of $5, and places his bet. A few days later, his cut of the winnings comes to $3.12. Not exactly a fortune, right? But for that kid, it was everything. He just proved that what he was seeing was real, not just wishful thinking. That young man was Jesse Livermore, though in the pages ahead, he goes by Livingston. And that tiny trade was the opening move in an incredible journey, one that would see him rake in and blow through millions, earn the nickname Boy Plunger, and ultimately unlock secrets about the market that still ring true today. We're about to dive into one of the most legendary books ever written about trading, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. It started life over a century ago as a series of articles by journalist Edwin Lefevre, and here's the beautiful part. It's not some dry how-to manual loaded with charts and equations. It's something much rarer. A window into the mind of a genuine master. Investment legends, from the founder of Fidelity funds to modern trading titans, have called it their Bible. Here's what I can promise you. By the time we wrap up today, you'll grasp the fundamental psychology driving all markets, stocks, crypto, whatever gets traded in the future. You'll understand what separates gambling from intelligent speculation, and you'll discover the most dangerous adversary any trader faces. Spoiler alert, it's not the market itself, it's that person staring back at you from the mirror every morning. Our journey doesn't start on the prestigious floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Instead, it begins in the shadowy back rooms of places called bucket shops. Now, these weren't your respectable brokerage houses. Think more like betting parlors dressed up in financial clothing. You weren't actually purchasing shares in a company. You were simply wagering against the house on which direction a stock price would move. The game was rigged, designed to drain the pockets of small-time gamblers. But for young Livingston, these bucket shops became the perfect training ground. With his photographic memory for numbers and his uncanny ability to read the tape, that narrow ribbon of paper spitting out stock prices, he wasn't gambling at all. He had a system. His philosophy was beautifully simple. Prices I saw were always changing. It was all I had to be interested in. I simply saw that they changed. He wasn't concerned with the company's story, economic forecasts, or breaking news. His entire focus was on one thing: how the price itself behaved. He understood that, quote, whatever happens in the stock market today has happened before and will happen again. History became his teacher. He started with pocket change, just a few dollars, and his approach worked like a charm. He'd spot a pattern, place his wager, and exit with a quick, modest profit. Before long, he was pocketing more during his lunch break than from his actual job as a board boy. By 15, he'd made his first $1,000. He brought the cash home and spread it across the kitchen table for his mother to see. She was absolutely terrified. To her, it was more money than any child should possess, and she begged him to lock it away in a savings bank, somewhere it couldn't tempt him. But for Livingston, the money was never really the point. As he put it, I didn't think of anything, except that I could keep on proving my figuring was right. That's all the fun there is, being right by using your head. If he was correct with 10 shares, he figured he'd be 10 times more correct with 100. The money was simply his scorecard. Naturally, the bucket shops weren't thrilled about some kid consistently walking away with their cash. They were in business to take money, not hand it out. One after another, they started turning him away. They'd spot him coming through the door and just shake their heads. "Nothing doing," they'd say. He resorted to fake names, even disguises, but his distinctive trading style always gave him away. They nicknamed him the Kid Plunger, and eventually, every bucket shop in town had banned him for life. He'd become a victim of his own brilliance. The very system that made him unbeatable had locked him out of the game entirely. So at 21, with a few $1,000s burning a hole in his pocket, he realized he had to level up. New York City, the beating heart of Wall Street. He was finally going to trade at a legitimate brokerage house, where he could buy and sell without limits. He was convinced his system was bulletproof. He was about to get a harsh reality check. In his first 6 months in New York, he lost absolutely everything, went completely bust. The system that had worked like magic in the bucket shops completely fell apart on the New York Stock Exchange. Why? Because he was playing an entirely different game now. In a bucket shop, when you placed your bet, the price locked in instantly. You knew exactly where you got in and where you got out. It was lightning fast. But on the actual exchange, there was a delay. By the time his order traveled from the broker's office to the trading floor and got filled, the price had often shifted. The ticker tape, which had been his most trusted guide, was now feeding him old news. He was constantly one step behind the actual market. As he put it, "I lost in New York because the game was altogether different. I was playing it ignorantly." This moment marked a turning point in his story. The boy wonder, the prodigy who could decode the market's hidden language, had been brought down to earth. He learned that raw talent only gets you so far. You've got to understand the specific rules of whatever game you're actually playing. Broke but not broken, he knew there was only one way forward. He had to return to the only game he knew he could consistently win. He approached his broker, a guy named Fullerton, and asked for a $500 loan. Not to trade in New York, but to head back to the bucket shops in another city and rebuild his bankroll. Fullerton, seeing the determination burning in this young man's eyes, gave him the cash. Livingston hopped on a train to St. Louis, where he found fresh bucket shops that hadn't yet heard tales of the quote, 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 quote. Within 48 hours, he'd transformed that 500 into nearly 3,000. But history repeated itself. His success made him a target once again. The shop owner called him into his private office and pointed at the crowd of customers outside. "See them?" he said. 300 suckers. They feed me and my family. Then you waltz in, and in 2 days, you take more than I squeeze out of those 300 in 2 weeks. That ain't business, kid. Not for me." Kicked out yet again. He returned to New York with a modest stake and fresh determination. He had to unlearn his old reflexes and master this more complex arena. And this is where his true education kicked into high gear. The biggest breakthrough came from an elderly gentleman in his broker's office, a quiet fellow everyone called Turkey because of his strutting walk. While other traders frantically jumped in and out, chasing rumors and tips, this old man, Mr. Partridge, remained impossibly calm. When eager young traders would pester him for advice, telling him about some hot stock and asking if they should cash out their profits, he'd always smile and deliver the same cryptic response. "You know, it's a bull market." At first, Livingston figured the old guy was losing his marbles. What kind of advice was that? But one afternoon he watched a young trader named Elmer rush up to Partridge. Elmer had just dumped all his shares, pocketing a nice profit, and he was urging the old man to do the same. "You'd better unload that stock and buy it back when it dips," Elmer insisted. Old Partridge looked genuinely distressed and replied, "My dear boy, if I sold that stock now, I'd lose my position, and then where would I be?" Lose his position? What on earth did that mean? The phrase lodged itself in Livingston's brain. He started examining his own trading patterns. He'd often correctly predict a major market move, but he'd capture only a tiny fraction of the money he should have made. Why? Because he was way too eager to grab small profits. He'd buy a stock, watch it climb a few points, and sell, congratulating himself for being smart and cautious. Then he'd torture himself watching that same stock continue rocketing another 20, 30, 50 points without him on board. Finally, he understood what Old Man Partridge was getting at. The old-timer wasn't interested in the daily zigzags. He was focused on the big wave, the major movement of the entire market. He knew that in a genuine bull market, the real fortunes weren't made by constantly jumping in and out, but by buying at the right time and then having the guts to sit tight. Selling out for a quick profit meant abandoning his position in the grand march of the market. Livingston later said this realization transformed his entire approach. He reflected, "It never was my thinking that made the big money for me. It always was my sitting. Got that? My sitting tight." Men who can both be right and sit tight are uncommon. I found it one of the hardest things to learn. But it is only after a stock operator has firmly grasped this that he can make big money. This marked his evolution from gambler to true speculator. A gambler bets on random fluctuations. A speculator anticipates probabilities based on study. He stopped obsessing over individual stocks and started studying the entire market landscape, the fundamental economic conditions. He wasn't just reading the tape anymore, he was reading the world itself. His first major test of this new philosophy arrived in 1906. Studying the global economy, he noticed warning signs everywhere. Wars had destroyed wealth. Natural disasters like the San Francisco earthquake had strained resources, and money was getting increasingly tight. He concluded that a major crash was inevitable. He turned bearish on the entire market. So he started selling short, betting on decline. The market dropped a bit, exactly as he'd predicted. But then it rallied hard. His paper profits evaporated and flipped into losses. He covered his positions, losing a significant chunk of capital. He waited it out, sold short again. Same story. A small dip followed by another punishing rally. Soon enough, he was completely wiped out. Here's the painful irony. He was absolutely right about the crash. It was coming. But he was dead broke. What went wrong? As he admitted, "So much for sprinting too soon. I was too eager to prove to myself that I had seen real dollars and not a mirage. I saw, and knew that I saw. Thinking about the reward for my excellent sight kept me from considering the distance to the dollar heap. I should have walked, and not sprinted." This lesson costs traders millions even in our modern markets. Being correct isn't enough. You have to be correct at the right moment. He'd accurately diagnosed the problem, but he'd started operating months too early. The patient, the market, still had enough strength to fight back. But Livingston was always a student of his failures. He didn't throw in the towel. He waited and watched, knowing the crash was still approaching, getting closer each day. The final confirmation he needed arrived in an unexpected package, a newspaper advertisement. Two of the nation's biggest railroads announced they were issuing new stock, but allowing stockholders to pay in installments. This had never been done before. To Livingston, it was a, quote, signed confession from the country's most powerful bankers. It meant they knew money was so scarce that even their wealthy stockholders couldn't afford to buy outright. The financial engine of the nation was running on fumes. This time, he didn't sprint ahead. He began his campaign methodically. He sold stocks short, and this time, the market didn't rally back. It started sliding downward. His paper profits grew steadily. Other traders told him he was insane, that the big interests would crush the bears. But Livingston wasn't trading on whispers anymore. As he said, "I felt for the first time in my life that I had allies, the strongest and truest in the world, underlying conditions." The market kept crumbling, building toward the Great Panic of 1907. On October 24th, all hell broke loose. Money simply vanished. Brokers couldn't borrow, which forced them to dump their clients' stocks at any price. The market went into complete freefall. Some of the biggest stocks in America had zero bids. The entire system teetered on the edge of total collapse. Livingston, heavily short, watched his paper profits swell beyond his wildest imagination. He was positioned to push the market completely over the cliff, to trigger a crash so catastrophic the stock exchange might have to shut down. Right then, a message reached him, a message from the most powerful financier in America, the legendary J.P. Morgan himself. The message was straightforward. "We hope he will not sell any more stocks today," appeal to his patriotism. Livingston had already reached the same conclusion independently. A total collapse would devastate the country, and ultimately harm him too. He wasn't just some trader anymore. He'd become a market force. So in the middle of the panic, while everyone else was desperately dumping shares, he did the opposite. He started buying. He covered every one of his short positions right at the bottom of the crash. That day, he made his first $1 million. He called it his day of days. It wasn't just about the money. It was the successful completion of his first campaign based on grand strategy. He'd looked ahead, analyzed conditions, acted with patience, and won decisively. He'd finally graduated from being a tape reader to being a market master. You'd think that after a victory like that, after finally cracking the code, he'd never lose again. But the market has a way of reminding you there are always more lessons waiting, and his next lesson would cost him more than any before. His downfall didn't come from a market crash or a bad trade. It came from a man, Percy Thomas, another legendary speculator known as the Cotton King. Thomas was brilliant, charismatic, magnetic. Livingston admired him deeply. After Thomas took a major hit, he approached Livingston with a proposal: partnership. Thomas had an incredible network for gathering intelligence on the cotton market. He'd provide the information, and Livingston, with his trading genius, would execute. Livingston refused initially. He told Thomas, "I play a lone hand by choice. I get my pleasure out of matching my brains against the brains of other traders." He knew he couldn't trade on someone else's information, but Thomas was persistent. They became close friends, spending hours discussing the cotton market. Thomas was incredibly bullish, armed with facts, figures, and unshakable conviction. Livingston, who'd been bearish, started second-guessing himself. He couldn't find holes in Thomas's arguments. As he explained, "I cannot say that I got all mixed up exactly, but I lost my poise. I ceased to do my own thinking. I came to read conditions as he himself read them." Against his better judgment, against the whispers of the tape that had guided him for years, Livingston abandoned his own convictions. He covered his short positions in cotton and went long instead. He bought, then bought more. The market wasn't behaving right. It wasn't acting the way it should, if Thomas was correct. But instead of cutting his losses, he did the one thing a speculator must never do. He tried to prop up the market himself. He kept buying more cotton, trying to prevent the price from falling. It was, in his own words, a super sucker play. Meanwhile, he had a large, profitable position in wheat. Feeling nervous about being overextended, he decided to lighten his load. In a moment of spectacular foolishness, he made a classic, fatal error. He sold the position showing him a profit, the wheat, and kept the one showing him a loss, the cotton. As he later reflected, of all speculative blunders, there are few greater than trying to average a losing game. Always sell what shows you a loss, and keep what shows you a profit. The wheat he sold went on to skyrocket, a trade that would have made him millions. The cotton he kept collapsed. He lost almost everything. The $1 million from the 1907 panic, and then some, vanished. He was beaten not by the market, but by his own human weakness. He'd allowed himself to be swayed by a powerful personality, and he'd violated his most fundamental rules. He learned that another dangerous enemy to a trader is his susceptibility to the urgings of a magnetic personality when plausibly expressed by a brilliant mind. The years that followed were long and brutal. He was over $1 million in debt, broke, discouraged, and for the first time in his life, his confidence was genuinely shaken. He realized he could never trade effectively with the crushing weight of debt hanging over him, so he made a difficult choice. In 1915, he declared bankruptcy. It was humiliating but necessary. It freed his mind. Now he needed a fresh stake. His old broker, Dan Williamson, offered him the slimmest of chances, credit to trade just 500 shares. It was a tiny fraction of what he was accustomed to, but it was a start. For 6 excruciating weeks, Livingston did absolutely nothing. Broke and desperate to trade, he showed up at the broker's office every single day, but didn't place one order. He just watched the tape. He was bullish on Bethlehem Steel, a company booming from the European War. He was certain it would soar. But he knew this first trade had to be a winner. He couldn't afford to be wrong. He forced himself to wait for the perfect psychological moment. He decided he wouldn't buy until the stock crossed the critical $100 mark. He watched it climb from the 80s into the 90s. Every point it rose was profit he wasn't capturing. The temptation was agonizing. As he said, those 6 weeks of waiting for the right moment were the most strenuous and wearing 6 weeks I ever put in. When the stock hit 98, he couldn't hold back any longer. He felt it in his bones. The tape was screaming at him. He rushed to his broker's office and bought his 500 shares. The very next day, the stock was trading at 145. He had his stake back. Patience and discipline had won the day. He'd waited for the market to confirm his judgment, and it paid off handsomely. From that moment forward, he was back in the game. Over the next 2 years, trading with renewed confidence and hard-earned wisdom, he made millions. The first thing he did? Tracked down every single creditor from his bankruptcy and paid them back in full, with interest. He even found the one small creditor who'd harassed him the most and made him wait until the very end, just to teach him a lesson about consideration. With his debts cleared and his fortune restored, he did something unprecedented for him. He took a significant chunk of his winnings and locked it into annuities and trust funds for his family, structured so that he himself could never touch it. He said he did it to protect his family from me. He knew better than anyone that the game was dangerous and that no victory was ever permanent. Livingston's story is a cycle of spectacular triumphs and crushing defeats, of learning and forgetting and learning all over again. He shows us that the market is a masterful, if sometimes brutal, teacher. It doesn't reward hope or punish fear. It rewards observation, patience, and the courage to act on your judgment, while maintaining the discipline to admit when you're wrong. He reminds us that the stock market is never obvious. It's designed to fool most people most of the time. The public craves being told what to do. They love hot tips. But Livingston warns that tips are the most poisonous enemy of any speculator. The real information isn't in the whispers of supposed insiders, but in the unemotional, unbiased language of the tape itself. A stock rises because there's more buying than selling. A stock falls because there's more selling than buying. That's all you need to know, and all the tape will ever tell you. Ultimately, his philosophy distills down to a handful of timeless truths. The big money isn't in the daily fluctuations, but in the great market trends. Being right and sitting tight are 2 completely different skills, and the latter is far more difficult. You must never argue with the tape. You must not hope when you should fear, and you must not fear when you should hope. And above all, you must know yourself. Because in the game of speculation, anyone who's a fool for hope, paralyzed by fear, blinded by greed, or swayed by someone else's charisma, is destined to lose, no matter how much they know. As Livingston himself concludes, a man may beat a stock or a group at a certain time, but no man living can beat the stock market. His life proved that truth. He won fortunes when he rode the great waves of the market, and he lost them when he tried to command the ocean itself. So what do we take from a story written a century ago about a world of tickers and chalkboards? It's tempting to think our modern world of algorithms and instant information has fundamentally changed everything. But if you really listen to Livingston's story, you realize nothing essential has changed at all. The technology has evolved dramatically, but human nature hasn't budged an inch. The lessons in Reminiscences of a Stock Operator aren't really about stocks at all. They're about psychology, discipline, and the eternal battle between reason and emotion. This book has endured because it speaks to a fundamental human struggle. We all want to believe there's a shortcut, some secret piece of information that'll give us an edge. We're all vulnerable to the seductive call of hope and the paralyzing grip of fear. Livingston's life serves as a powerful reminder that shortcuts don't exist. Success in any high-stakes endeavor comes from study, patience, and brutal honesty with yourself. One of the most powerful concepts in the book is this idea of sitting tight. In our hyper-reactive world, where we're constantly encouraged to check, update, and react instantly, the notion of doing nothing feels almost revolutionary. Livingston teaches us that once you've done your homework and made a decision based on sound reasoning, often the most profitable action is simply inaction. It's about having the conviction to let your strategy play out, resisting the emotional urge to tinker with it at the first sign of turbulence. This lesson reaches far beyond the stock market. It applies to building a business, pursuing a long-term career goal, or any venture requiring a long-term vision. The other profound lesson involves the danger of losing yourself. Livingston's greatest loss didn't stem from a bad market call. It happened when he stopped trusting his own judgment and started playing someone else's game. He allowed Percy Thomas's charisma and conviction to override his own internal compass. How often do we do this in our own lives? We listen to the convincing arguments of others, friends, family, experts, and we abandon our own intuition, only to regret it later. Livingston's expensive mistake stands as a timeless warning to cultivate and trust your own independent thinking. So how can we apply this wisdom today? Here are a few practical steps inspired by the book. First, become a genuine student of whatever game you choose to play. Livingston didn't just dabble, he devoted his life to understanding the market. Whether your passion is investing, launching a business, or mastering a craft, commit to deep study. Don't just hunt for tips and shortcuts. Read the history, grasp the fundamentals, and learn from the mistakes of those who came before you. Second, develop your own set of rules and cultivate the discipline to stick with them. Livingston's system wasn't rocket science. He bought in rising markets, sold in falling ones. He cut losses quickly and let profits run. The key wasn't the sophistication of his rules, but his unwavering commitment to them. Take time to write down your own principles for making important decisions. What are your non-negotiables? What mistakes are you prone to making? Having written rules can serve as a powerful anchor during moments of emotional chaos. And third, practice emotional detachment. This is perhaps the hardest lesson of all. Livingston learned to view his losses not as personal failures, but as tuition for his education. He never argued with the market. He accepted its verdict and moved forward. The next time you face a setback, whether financial or personal, try stepping back and analyzing it with the cold detachment of a scientist. What can this failure teach you? How can you use this mistake to make your next move smarter? That was a summary of Reminiscences of a Stock Operator by Edwin Lefevre. We've explored the highlights today, the incredible peaks and devastating valleys of a trading legend's journey. But a summary, no matter how detailed, can only ever be a map. The real treasure reveals itself when you take the journey yourself. The true power of this book lies in the stories, the details, and the quiet moments of reflection that can only come from reading it cover to cover. This summary is your guide to help you decide if this journey is one worth taking. If anything we've discussed today has sparked your curiosity, or resonated with a part of your own ambition, then I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning the secrets of the market. It's an experience that can fundamentally shift how you think about risk, discipline, and yourself. You'll find the link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey into a classic valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.